One week before my wedding, my supposed sister-in-law suddenly moved into my home without a single word of warning. My fiancé helped her drag her luggage across my imported hardwood floors like it was the most normal thing in the world. I stood by the kitchen island watching him gently tuck a stray blonde curl behind her ear and place his hand protectively on her lower back. The boxes and bags they were carrying were clearly not packed for a short weekend visit. That night, the suspicion gnawing at my gut led me to open the closet in her guest room. What I found hidden inside did not just cancel my luxury wedding, it ended with flashing police lights and federal charges. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit the like button and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to people who underestimated your intelligence and thought they could play you for a fool in your own home. My name is Nia. I am 30 years old and I work as a risk management director for a top-tier investment bank here in Atlanta. Growing up in a working-class neighborhood taught me very early that no one was going to hand me anything. I had to build my own empire from the ground up. Through late nights, endless studying, and ruthless corporate climbing, I bought my dream home at 27. It is a stunning $1.5 million townhouse in Buckhead, featuring floor-to-ceiling windows and a custom chef's kitchen. It is my sanctuary physical proof that a Black woman can break glass ceilings and secure her own wealth without anyone's permission. Marcus, my 32-year-old fiancé, seemed like the perfect addition to the life I had built. He was a sports agent who always wore custom Italian suits, flashed a $1 million smile, and knew exactly what to say to make people feel important. He moved in with me a year ago. While he brought his charming personality and an expensive wardrobe, he brought very little actual financial equity into our relationship. But I loved him, or at least the version of him he presented to me, so I ignored the subtle red flags. I ignored the late nights at the office and the sudden drops in intimacy. I blamed it on wedding stress. I was wrong. The reality of my situation arrived on a Tuesday evening exactly 7 days before I was supposed to walk down the aisle. I was reviewing some vendor contracts for the reception when I heard the heavy thud of the front door opening, followed by the aggressive rattling of luggage wheels. I stepped out of my office and froze. There was Marcus struggling to pull 4 massive suitcases through the entryway. Right behind him was Chloe, a 28-year-old white woman who was married to Marcus's younger brother Jamal. Chloe stood in the center of my foyer, looking around my home with a highly critical eye. She did not say hello. She did not apologize for the sudden intrusion. She just sighed dramatically, dropping her designer handbag onto my pristine console table. Marcus dropped the suitcases and immediately rushed to her side. He looked at her with a tender devotion that I had not seen directed at me in months. He gently guided her toward the living room, asking if she was too warm, if she needed water, if the ride over had been too bumpy. He was hovering over her like she was made of glass. I stood there, in my own hallway, entirely invisible to the man I was supposed to marry. Nia, Marcus finally said, noticing me standing completely still. His voice dripped with that smooth, practiced salesman charm he used on his high-profile clients. Jamal is out of town on business for the next few weeks, and Chloe is feeling overwhelmed. She needs a stable environment right now with the baby coming. I told her she could stay in the guest room until after the wedding. We are family after all, and we have to take care of her. Family. The word hung in the air, heavy, manipulative, and incredibly insulting. I looked at the 4 oversized suitcases lined up against my freshly painted walls. You do not pack 4 massive pieces of luggage for a short stay to clear your head. You pack them when you are moving in. Hi, Chloe, I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. A heads up would have been nice. The guest room is currently holding my wedding dresses, the bridesmaids' gifts, and a lot of sensitive work documents. Chloe finally turned her head to look at me. Her blue eyes were wide, playing the picture of absolute innocence, but there was a hard, entitled edge to her stare. Oh, Marcus said it would not be a problem at all, she replied, her tone dripping with passive aggression. I really need the space, Nia. My back has been killing me and Jamal is just never around. Marcus is the only one who actually takes care of me these days. As she spoke, she placed her small hand flat against Marcus's chest. It was not a sisterly touch. It was a claiming gesture. A slow, deliberate press of her palm against his expensive dress shirt right over his heart. Any decent man who respected his fiancée would have immediately taken a step back. Marcus did not step away. He leaned into her touch. He placed his own hand over hers and gave her fingers a reassuring squeeze. "You just go sit down on the sofa," Marcus told her softly, his back completely turned to me now. "I will carry all these heavy bags upstairs and clear out all of Nia's wedding stuff for you. Do not strain yourself." I watched this bizarre, deeply disrespectful performance with absolute cold clarity. I am a woman of logic. In my line of work, when you spot an anomaly in the data, you do not throw a tantrum. You do not scream or cry. You observe. You investigate. You gather hard evidence until the truth is undeniable. They thought I was just a busy, distracted bride who would simply absorb this massive inconvenience to keep the peace. They thought they could disrespect me in my own home right under my nose, relying on the fact that I was too preoccupied with seating charts and floral arrangements to notice their blatant audacity. They assumed I would just roll over and play the accommodating host, because society conditions women to always be polite. But they severely underestimated the woman they were dealing with. I did not get to the top of the financial food chain by letting parasites feed off my hard work. I plastered a polite, warm smile on my face and stepped aside. "Of course," I said smoothly, my voice betraying absolutely none of the rage boiling in my blood. "Let me know if you need fresh towels, Chloe. Make yourself at home." Chloe smirked a tiny, triumphant lifting of the corner of her mouth and walked straight to my custom velvet sofa, collapsing onto it as if her name was on the mortgage. Marcus immediately followed her to fluff her pillows. I turned around and walked back to my home office, closing the solid oak door behind me. If Chloe was moving in, she was bringing baggage. And I do not mean the designer suitcases currently scuffing my floors. People who operate with that level of arrogant entitlement always leave a paper trail. I just needed to find it. I decided right then and there to wait for the house to go completely quiet. I would let them sleep, and then I would do what I do best. I would audit them. The digital clock on my nightstand glowed 2 in the morning. I slipped out from under the heavy Egyptian cotton sheets, moving with deliberate caution so the mattress would not shift. Marcus was snoring softly beside me, his chest rising and falling in a steady, peaceful rhythm. He looked entirely relaxed, completely unaware that the woman lying next to him had spent the last 4 hours dissecting every single word he had spoken in the hallway. I grabbed my silk robe and tied it tightly around my waist. The hardwood floors were ice cold against my bare feet as I moved silently out of the master suite and down the long corridor. The house was completely dark save for the low hum of the central air conditioning and the faint silver moonlight spilling through the tall windows. I am not a paranoid woman by nature. In the world of corporate banking and risk management, paranoia gets you fired. Preparation, however, gets you promoted. I approached the guest room door. It was closed, but I knew the hinges did not squeak because I had oiled them myself 2 months ago when preparing the house for my bridal party. I turned the brass knob with agonizing slowness, pushing the door open just enough to slip my body through the gap. Chloe was fast asleep on the custom queen bed, her breathing heavy and erratic. She had not bothered to unpack properly. The 4 massive suitcases were lying open on the floor, exploding with expensive maternity clothes, high-end beauty products, and tangled charging cables. It looked like a luxury boutique had been ransacked in the middle of my perfectly curated home. I stepped carefully over a pile of cashmere sweaters, my eyes scanning the room for anything out of place. People who lie for a living always have a stash. They always have a physical place where they keep the hard truth they are desperately hiding from the rest of the world. I moved toward the walk-in closet. The door was slightly ajar. I slipped inside and gently pulled it shut behind me, leaving just a tiny crack for air. I turned on the small flashlight application on my phone, keeping the beam pointed strictly downward so the light would not bleed into the bedroom. I began sifting through the hanging garments. She had rudely pushed my meticulously bagged wedding dresses to the far back corner, replacing them with her own silk robes and designer jackets. I dropped to my knees to inspect the floor space. At the very bottom, pushed behind a row of expensive leather boots and a stack of empty shoe boxes, I saw it. A heavy matte black metal lockbox. It was the kind you could buy at any office supply store, designed to hold petty cash or highly sensitive documents. It looked entirely out of place among the high-end fashion. I pulled the heavy box toward me. It had a 4-digit mechanical combination lock. My heart began to beat a little faster against my ribs. If Chloe had packed this so securely and hidden it at the very bottom of her luggage, it held something she absolutely could not afford to lose. I stared at the metal dials. A 4-digit code. The obvious choice would be her own birthday, or perhaps her anniversary with Jamal. I could have easily gone back to my home office and pulled up her public records to find those exact dates, but my professional intuition told me something else. This entire situation reeked of Marcus. His overbearing attentiveness, his insistence on bringing her into my home, the way he let her press her hand against his chest. I reached out and spun the small metal dials. 0, 8, 1, 4, August 14th. I put in Marcus's birthday. I pressed the release button. A sharp metallic click echoed in the small enclosed space. The latch popped open. My breath caught in my throat. The undeniable fact that her secret lockbox was secured by my future husband's birthday was a louder confession than any spoken word could ever be. I slowly lifted the heavy metal lid. Inside the box were 2 thick manila folders. I pulled out the first one and opened it under the dim beam of my phone light. The corporate letterhead belonged to one of the most exclusive and expensive fertility clinics in the state of Georgia. It was a final invoice for in vitro fertilization treatments. I scanned down the itemized list to the total amount due, $65,000. The primary patient listed was Chloe. The secondary party, the donor, was not Jamal. That line was left completely blank, but there was a small handwritten sticky note clipped to the front of the heavy invoice. It simply said, "Thank you, Marcus, for covering the final installment." My stomach dropped into a bottomless pit. Marcus was paying for his sister-in-law to get pregnant to the tune of tens of thousands of dollars. This was the same man who had spent the last 3 months telling me we needed to severely cut back on our wedding budget because his sports agency was having a terrible quarter. But the worst was yet to come. I placed the fertility clinic invoice down and opened the second folder. It contained a massive stack of complex legal and financial documents. The top page was a commercial loan application for the Small Business Administration. The requested funding amount was $2.5 million. The primary applicant was Marcus's sports management agency. I am a risk management director. I read complex financial documents faster than most people read magazines. I quickly flipped past the executive summary straight to the collateral section to see exactly how Marcus planned to secure a multi-million-dollar federal loan. Federal loans require heavy, undeniable collateral. Marcus had no hard assets. His luxury car was leased. His flashy office downtown was rented. There, listed in stark black and white ink, was the address of my Buckhead townhouse. The property I had purchased entirely with my own money years before I even met him. The property currently valued at $1.5 million. I flipped frantically to the final signature page. There was Marcus's signature, bold and arrogant, on the applicant line. And right beneath it, on the designated line for the property owner and primary guarantor, was my name, Nia. It was signed in a looping cursive that looked incredibly similar to my actual handwriting, but to my trained eye, it was undeniably forged. The sheer audacity of what I was looking at temporarily paralyzed my lungs. The man currently sleeping peacefully in my bed, The man I was supposed to marry in exactly 7 days in front of 300 guests had literally forged my signature to put a massive federal lien on my home. He was planning to use my hard-earned assets to secretly fund his failing business, all while secretly paying for his brother's wife to have a child. The puzzle pieces snapped together with violent, sickening clarity. Jamal was not away on a business trip. Jamal was likely out of the picture entirely. Chloe was not here for a short, relaxing visit to clear her head. She was here because Marcus was funding her entire existence, and they needed to keep her close to control the narrative. They brought her right into my home because they were arrogant enough to believe I would never look past the heavy facade of family duty. They thought my love made me blind. I did not panic. I did not run down the hallway, turn on the bedroom lights, and wake Marcus up to demand answers. Screaming matches are for weak people who do not have any actual leverage. I had all the leverage right in my hands. I took my phone out of my pocket and opened the camera. I meticulously photographed every single page of the fertility clinic invoice. I photographed every single page of the forged federal loan application, making sure the lighting clearly captured the fraudulent signature next to Marcus's name. I took wide pictures of the lockbox itself sitting among her clothes. When I was absolutely certain all the evidence was backed up to my secure cloud storage, I placed the folders exactly as I had found them. I closed the heavy lid, snapped the lock shut, and spun the dials back to a random sequence of numbers. I pushed the box deep behind the leather boots, hiding it perfectly in the shadows. As I stood up and quietly slipped out of the closet, a profound sense of absolute calm washed over me. It was not the calm of acceptance or forgiveness. It was the icy, terrifying focus of a professional who has just identified a catastrophic threat and is preparing to neutralize it permanently. I walked back down the dark hallway and slipped back into bed beside the man who thought he had successfully stolen my entire future. I closed my eyes and matched my breathing to his. The wedding was in 7 days, but the absolute dismantling of Marcus and his parasitic family would begin tomorrow morning over breakfast. The morning sun poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my kitchen, casting long, peaceful shadows across the hardwood floors. It was a beautiful Wednesday. I stood at the marble island sipping a cup of dark roast coffee, waiting. I had been awake since my 2 o'clock discovery in the guest room. I spent those hours connecting my phone to my wireless printer in the home office, producing crisp, high-resolution copies of the documents I had photographed. The forged $2.5 million loan application and the $65,000 fertility invoice now sat neatly inside a manila folder right next to the fruit bowl. At 7:30, Marcus strolled down the stairs. He was wearing his expensive silk loungewear, looking entirely rested and completely unbothered. He walked up behind me, kissed my cheek, and poured himself a cup of coffee. A few moments later, Chloe shuffled into the kitchen. She was wearing one of my expensive cashmere throws draped over her shoulders like a robe, her blonde hair messy in a way that was meant to look endearing. She offered a weak, pitiful sigh as she sat down at the breakfast table. I picked up the manila folder, walked over to the table, and dropped it right in front of Marcus's coffee mug. The heavy thud of the paper hitting the wood echoed in the quiet room. "Take a look at that," I said, my voice perfectly steady. "And then explain to me why you are funding an outrageously expensive pregnancy for another woman, and why my signature is forged on a federal loan document, putting my home up as collateral." The air in the kitchen instantly vanished. Chloe froze her hand, hovering over a pastry. Marcus stopped mid-sip. I watched his eyes dart from the papers to my face. I expected him to panic. I expected him to stutter, to beg for forgiveness, to drop to his knees. Instead, I witnessed something far more terrifying. I witnessed a master manipulator pivot flawlessly. The brief flash of shock in his eyes vanished in a second, replaced by a look of profound, heavy disappointment. He set his mug down slowly and let out a long, exhausted sigh. He did not look guilty. He looked like a weary father dealing with an unreasonable child. "Nia," he said, keeping his voice incredibly soft and soothing. Why were you going through Chloe's private belongings in the middle of the night? That is a massive invasion of privacy. I honestly expected better from you. I stared at him, stunned by the sheer audacity of his opening move. Do not try to turn this around on me, Marcus. You forged my name. You put a lien on my house. He reached across the table and tried to take my hand, but I pulled it back. He shook his head sadly. You are not looking at the whole picture, baby. You are looking at numbers on a page and jumping to the worst possible conclusions without letting me explain. Jamal found out he is completely sterile. The news absolutely destroyed him. He fell into a deep depression. Chloe was devastated. As his older brother, I had to step up. I agreed to be the sperm donor so they could have a piece of our family line. That is all it is, Nia. Basic biology. I paid the invoice because Jamal's finances are tied up in his new business venture. He leaned forward, looking deeply into my eyes with a practiced sincerity that made my skin crawl. And the loan. My agency is on the verge of a massive expansion. I'm about to sign 3 top-tier draft picks. I needed a bridge loan to cover the upfront costs. I put your name on the application as a placeholder because we are getting married in a week. What is mine is yours, and what is yours is mine. We are building a life together. I was literally going to sit you down tonight over dinner and explain the whole strategy to you. But instead, you went snooping like someone who does not trust the man she loves. The psychological spin was dizzying. He was taking a calculated multi-million-dollar financial crime and an absolute betrayal of our relationship and repackaging them as acts of profound brotherly love and brilliant business strategy. He was actively trying to make me feel crazy for reading the black and white proof of his deception. Before I could even dismantle his ridiculous lies, Chloe chimed in. She let out a sharp, trembling gasp. I looked over at her. Her blue eyes were welling up with tears. Her lower lip was quivering. She was activating the ultimate weapon, white female tears designed to evoke immediate sympathy and paint whoever caused them as the undeniable aggressor. Please, Nia. Chloe whispered, her voice cracking perfectly. Please do not be angry with him. Marcus is just trying to save our family. You have to understand how hard this has been for me. My hormones are everywhere. I just want a baby so badly. A single tear rolled down her cheek and she wiped it away with the edge of my cashmere throw. You have everything, Nia. You have this massive, gorgeous house. You have a powerful career where you make so much money. You are marrying a man who would do absolutely anything to provide for his family. Please do not let a piece of paper destroy our family bond. We need this loan. We need this baby. If you cancel that loan application now, Jamal and I will lose everything. You cannot be that selfish. I stood there as the room seemed to tilt on its axis. The sheer force of their combined gaslighting created a suffocating trapping sensation. It was a brilliantly executed trap. If I reacted with the screaming table-flipping rage that they truly deserved, I would instantly become the villain in their narrative. I would be the angry, unsupportive, aggressive black woman attacking a vulnerable pregnant white woman and a devoted, hardworking black man who was just trying to uplift his family. They would use my justifiable anger to paint me as the crazy one to everyone we knew. They expected me to fold. They expected my guilt and my desire to be a good supportive wife to override my professional instincts. They wanted me to look at a forged signature and accept it as a messy but well-intentioned act of love. I took a slow, deep breath, anchoring myself back to reality. I looked at Marcus's calm, manipulative face, and then at Chloe's tear-stained, entitled expression. I realized in that moment that confronting them directly was completely useless. You cannot negotiate with parasites, you can only cut off their supply. I forced the tension out of my shoulders. I let my eyes soften. I reached out and gently placed my hand over Marcus's hand. I am sorry, I said, making my voice sound shaky and unsure. I was just shocked. Seeing my signature on something I did not actually sign terrified me. You should have told me your plan earlier, Marcus. Marcus exhaled a loud breath of relief, his confident smile returning instantly. He turned his hand over and squeezed my fingers. I know, baby. I know I should have communicated better. But everything is under control. I promise you. We are going to be so wealthy and so happy. I looked over at Chloe and offered her a small, tight smile. Do not cry, Chloe. Stress is bad for the baby. I picked up my coffee mug and walked out of the kitchen, leaving them at the breakfast table, thinking they had successfully neutralized the threat. They thought they had won. They had no idea that by confirming their absolute lack of remorse, they had just given me the green light to burn their entire world down to the ground. I stopped in the doorway, the cool ceramic of my coffee mug pressing against my palm. A good risk management director knows that words of surrender are never enough to convince a hostile party. You have to sell the physical performance. If I simply walked away after my sudden change of heart, Marcus's paranoia would eventually catch up with him. He was a sports agent, someone whose entire career revolved around reading body language, analyzing silent cues, and anticipating his opponent's next move. I needed to leave him completely and utterly disarmed. I turned slowly on my heels and walked back into the kitchen. Marcus tensed slightly, his broad shoulders stiffening as I approached the breakfast table. But instead of slamming my mug down or raising my voice to demand more answers, I walked directly over to his chair. I leaned down and wrapped my arms around his neck, pressing my cheek against his. I really am so sorry, I whispered, making sure my voice carried a slight tremor of manufactured guilt. Wedding planning has me so on edge and I am just exhausted. I should have trusted you, Marcus. You have always looked out for your family, and that is one of the reasons I fell in love with you. He let out a long, heavy breath, all the tension leaving his body at once. His arms came up to wrap around my waist, and he pulled me close, burying his face in my shoulder. It is okay, baby, he murmured, completely falling for the illusion. We are a team. We are going to get through this together. As I rested my chin on his shoulder, my face turned away from his line of sight and directed straight toward the dark reflection of the kitchen window. The soft, apologetic expression instantly dissolved from my features. A cold, sharp smirk cut across my face. It was the look of a predator watching its prey happily walk into a locked cage. I gently pulled away from Marcus and walked over to the other side of the table where Chloe sat. She was still dabbing at her dry eyes with my expensive cashmere throw. I leaned down and wrapped my arms around her shoulders in a firm, deliberate hug. She stiffened for a fraction of a second, clearly surprised by the physical contact, before relaxing into the embrace. I could smell her expensive floral perfume. It was a brand I knew Marcus had purchased on my credit card just last month, claiming it was a birthday gift for his mother. The sheer disgust I felt in my stomach was entirely masked by my polite, sympathetic smile. If I had exploded in that moment, thrown my engagement ring in his face, and kicked them both out into the street, I would have won a temporary emotional victory, but I would have lost the war. Canceling the wedding right then would have tipped them off. Marcus would have immediately rushed to withdraw the federal loan application, destroying the hard evidence of his financial crime. He would have vanished into the wind, leaving me with a broken heart, a ruined public image, and tens of thousands of dollars in non-refundable vendor deposits for a canceled luxury wedding. I was not going to let him walk away clean. In the corporate banking world, we study how desperate people rationalize their crimes. Marcus had convinced himself that his sports agency would eventually take off, that he would pay back the federal loan before I ever noticed the lien on my property, and that Chloe's illegitimate baby would simply blend into our extended family network. But I knew the brutal reality of small business administration loans. When a highly leveraged business fails, the federal government does not care about your excuses. They come for the collateral. They would have seized my townhouse. They would have garnished my executive salary. They would have destroyed my spotless financial reputation, rendering me completely unemployable in the banking sector. Marcus was not just cheating on me. He was actively attempting to destroy my entire future to subsidize his own mistakes. I pulled back from Chloe, giving her one last reassuring squeeze on the arm. Take the master suite today if you want to nap, I offered sweetly, feeding her the exact validation her entitled mentality craved. The mattress in there is much better for your back. I am heading into the office early to finish some reports. I grabbed my car keys and my designer briefcase from the console table. As I walked out to the garage, the adrenaline that had been surging through my veins since 2 in the morning finally settled into a cold, terrifying focus. I stepped into my car and gripped the leather steering wheel. I was no longer a bride preparing for the happiest day of her life. I was a lead auditor preparing for a hostile corporate takeover. The wedding was exactly 7 days away. That gave me 168 hours to meticulously dismantle the life of the man who thought he could steal mine. I pulled my car into the garage at 6 o'clock that evening. I had spent my entire day at the bank quietly pulling strings, utilizing my high-level security clearance to secure the digital evidence I needed. I felt like a general returning to base, fully prepared for the next phase of battle. But the moment I unlocked my front door, the heavy, overwhelming smell of fried food and cheap floral room spray hit my face. My house had been invaded. I walked down the hallway and stepped into my living room, stopping dead in my tracks at the scene unfolding in front of me. Brenda Marcus's mother was standing in the center of the room. She was a tall, heavy-set woman who always wore far too much gold jewelry and carried herself with an imposing, domineering energy that demanded absolute submission from everyone around her. She was currently holding a large black plastic trash bag. I watched in silent horror as she carelessly shoved my custom silk throw pillows, the ones I had imported directly from Italy, into the garbage. My heavy crystal vases, gifts from my corporate mentors, had been shoved off the coffee table and placed on the floor near the dog bed. In their place, Brenda was aggressively fluffing tacky pastel knitted blankets and arranging cheap wooden signs with phrases like "Live, Laugh, Love" across my expensive mantelpiece. Sitting on my sofa, completely comfortable amidst the destruction of my property, was Chloe. She was sipping a mug of hot tea, her feet resting on my pristine suede ottoman with her shoes still on. She offered me a small, smug smile as I walked into the room. "What exactly is going on here?" I asked, keeping my voice dangerously quiet. Brenda spun around, planting her hands firmly on her wide hips. She looked down her nose at me, her face twisting into a scowl. "It is about time you got home, Nia. A real woman should not be leaving her man alone all day when there is family under her roof that needs to be taken care of. But since you were too busy playing boss at your little bank job, I had to come over here and make this place fit for a pregnant woman." She kicked the garbage bag full of my expensive pillows. "Your house looks like a sterile corporate lobby. It does not feel like a home. It is cold. It is uninviting. Chloe needs a soft, nurturing environment for the baby. No wonder Marcus has been looking so stressed lately. A man needs warmth and comfort when he comes home, not a boardroom." The blatant disrespect was staggering. She was standing in the middle of a $1.5 million home that I paid for with my own blood, sweat, and tears, and she was criticizing me for not making it soft enough for her son's pregnant mistress. But I did not react. I simply stared at her, letting my silence force her to keep talking. Toxic people hate silence because it makes them feel like they are losing control of the narrative. "Marcus called me this morning." Brenda continued, taking a step toward me to physically close the distance and try to intimidate me. "He told me about the little tantrum you threw over his business loan. I have to say, Nia, I am deeply disappointed in you. I raised my son to be a provider. He is trying to build a massive empire for your future, and you are acting like a selfish, ungrateful roommate." She pointed a heavily manicured finger at my chest. "You think your fancy job and your salary make you better than everyone else? But let me tell you a secret about men. Money does not keep a man warm at night. Submission does. Blind support does. You are 30 years old and you barely know how to cook a proper meal for my son because you are always chained to your laptop. You should be thanking God on your knees that Marcus is willing to marry a harsh, career-obsessed woman like you. Most men would have left you a long time ago for someone softer, someone who actually understands the meaning of family and knows how to nurture a man." She cast a deliberate, lingering look over at Chloe, who instantly looked down and played with the edge of her pastel blanket, acting like the perfect picture of delicate femininity. The implication was so loud it practically echoed off the walls. Brenda was not just covering for Marcus, she was actively endorsing his affair. She preferred Chloe's weak, dependent nature because it made Marcus feel like a king, whereas my independence constantly reminded him of his own financial failures. I took a slow breath, keeping my facial muscles completely relaxed. "I am sorry you feel that way, Brenda," I said evenly. "I was just surprised by the paperwork this morning. That is all." "Well, you need to get over your surprise and start acting like a wife," Brenda snapped. She marched over to her oversized leather purse resting on my dining table. She reached inside and pulled out a thick manila envelope, slapping it down hard onto my marble kitchen island. "Since you are so obsessed with paperwork, I brought these for you," she demanded. "These are the supplemental guarantor forms for the commercial loan. The bank called Marcus this afternoon. They need these secondary waivers signed in blue ink by tomorrow morning to clear the $2.5 million funds. You are going to sit down right now, sign your name on the dotted lines, and stop making my son beg for your support." I walked over to the kitchen island and looked down at the documents. My professional training kicked into high gear. I recognized these forms instantly. They were secondary liability waivers. If a primary signature on a federal loan is ever contested or flagged for fraud, these supplemental documents serve as legal proof that the guarantor was fully aware of the debt and accepted the terms unconditionally. Marcus had panicked after my confrontation this morning. He realized that leaving the forged signature as the only proof was too risky. He needed me to sign these new papers to legally trap me and erase any possibility of me claiming fraud later. And he had sent his mother to bully me into doing it. "Sign them," Brenda ordered, pulling a blue pen from her purse and shoving it toward me. "Chloe is carrying your future niece or nephew. Marcus is building your future wealth. Stop being selfish and sign the papers." Chloe chimed in from the living room, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "It will just take a second, Nia. Then we can all just relax and have a nice family dinner. Marcus ordered takeout from that expensive Italian place you like." I looked at the blue pen in Brenda's hand. If I refused to sign them right now, a massive fight would break out. Marcus would come home, the wedding might be called off prematurely, and they would scramble to hide their tracks. I needed to keep the illusion alive just a little bit longer. I needed to take possession of these documents because they were the final nail in Marcus's federal indictment coffin. I reached out and took the pen from Brenda's hand. I pulled the documents toward me and flipped to the last page. I leaned over the marble island and pressed the pen to the paper. But I did not write my name. Instead, I used a specialized technique I had learned years ago during a corporate fraud seminar. I signed a completely different name, utilizing a messy, unreadable scrawl that vaguely resembled my initials, but was legally distinct from my actual signature. It was a phantom signature. To a desperate man and his arrogant mother, it looked like compliance. To a forensic handwriting expert at the FBI, it would look like blatant, undeniable coercion. I flipped through the remaining 3 pages, scratching the same phantom signature on each one. I kept my face soft, projecting an aura of complete, defeated submission. "There," I said quietly, sliding the papers back toward Brenda. "I hope this proves that I am committed to this family." Brenda snatched the envelope off the counter with a triumphant smirk. She checked the signature lines, her eyes gleaming with greedy satisfaction. "That is much better, Nia. See how easy it is when you just listen to your elders and do what you are told. Now go upstairs and change out of those stiff work clothes. You are making the baby anxious with all your negative corporate energy." I turned around and walked toward the staircase. Every single step I took felt lighter than the last. Brenda and Chloe thought they had just bullied me into handing over my house and my financial freedom. They thought my silence was weakness. They had absolutely no idea that I had just secured the exact piece of physical evidence the federal authorities needed to prove a coordinated conspiracy to commit wire fraud. Dinner was going to be delicious. I walked upstairs into my master suite and closed the door, letting the silence of the room wash over me. I needed to completely transform my physical appearance to match the psychological submission they expected to see. I stripped off my tailored corporate blazer, my crisp silk blouse, and my structured skirt. I walked into my custom closet and pulled out a soft, oversized gray cashmere sweater and a pair of simple leggings. I took my hair out of its tight professional bun and let it fall loosely around my shoulders. I looked in the full-length mirror. I did not look like a high-powered banking executive anymore. I looked soft-tired and thoroughly defeated. It was the exact image of the broken woman Brenda demanded her son marry. Before I left the room, I raised my left wrist. I tapped the screen of my Apple Watch, navigating directly to the secure voice memo application I had installed earlier that day. I pressed the bright red record button. The small timer began to count the seconds. I pulled the long, heavy sleeve of my cashmere sweater down completely, concealing the watch face and its glowing red indicator. I took one final deep breath to center myself. I was no longer just a homeowner dealing with difficult in-laws. I was an active investigator wiring myself for a hostile interrogation. When I walked back downstairs, Marcus had just arrived. He was standing by the kitchen island, still wearing his tailored suit, holding the manila envelope Brenda had forced me to sign. I watched his shoulders drop in a massive exhale of relief as he flipped through the pages and saw the phantom signatures I had scribbled at the bottom of the guarantor waivers. He looked up and saw me standing at the bottom of the staircase. A wide, dazzling smile spread across his face. "Thank you, baby," he said, walking over and wrapping his arms around me in a tight embrace. "I knew you would come around. I knew you would see the big picture. I am building this empire for us." I rested my head against his chest, right near his racing heart. "You are welcome, Marcus," I whispered softly. "I just want our family to be okay." The heavy aroma of garlic and rich tomato sauce filled the room as the expensive Italian takeout was unpacked. I walked into the kitchen and began plating the food. I took out my best imported ceramic dishes and polished silverware. I served Brenda first, placing a generous portion of lobster ravioli in front of her, followed by Chloe and then Marcus. I poured the sparkling water and arranged the garlic bread in a woven basket. I moved around my own dining room like a hired servant, keeping my eyes lowered and my voice submissive. Brenda sat at the head of the table, a position she had aggressively claimed for herself the moment she sat down. She took a bite of her pasta and chewed slowly, looking around my dining room with a critical sneer. "See, Nia," Brenda said, pointing her fork at me. "This is how a real household is supposed to run. A man comes home from a hard day of building his business, and his woman has food on the table. If you acted like this more often, Marcus would not be so stressed out all the time." I took my seat next to Marcus and folded my hands in my lap. "You are right, Brenda," I said, keeping my tone entirely even. "I have been too focused on my job at the bank. The paperwork today just scared me. I have never been involved in a commercial loan before." Marcus reached under the table and squeezed my knee. "It is handled now, Nia. The waivers you signed tonight clear up all the red tape. The funds will be released by Friday. We have nothing to worry about." I looked down at my plate, letting my voice tremble just enough to sound authentically paranoid. "I know I signed the secondary waivers, Marcus, but I am still terrified about the primary application, the one submitted to the federal government." I paused, letting the silence stretch across the table for 2 agonizing seconds before I dropped the bait. What if the bank auditors look closely at that first document? What if they realize that the signature on the $2.5 million collateral form is not actually mine, that someone forged my handwriting? Marcus stiffened instantly. His hand gripped my knee so hard it bruised. He opened his mouth to quickly shut the conversation down, to spin another lie, but Brenda beat him to it. Toxic arrogance is the greatest enemy of a criminal, and Brenda was the most arrogant woman I had ever met. She could not stand the idea of me questioning her son's authority. "Oh, stop your dramatic whining, Nia," Brenda snapped, slamming her hand down on the table so hard the crystal water glasses rattled. My watch silently recorded every single decibel of her outrage. So what if Marcus signed your name on that initial application? He is the man of the house. He needed the collateral quickly to secure his draft picks. And you were entirely too busy playing corporate boss at that bank of yours to do your duty as a fiancé. I looked up at her, widening my eyes in feigned disbelief to push her further. So you knew, I asked, making my voice sound small and fragile. You knew he copied my signature to put a lien on my house. Of course I knew, Brenda announced proudly, completely oblivious to the legal gravity of her own words. I was the one who told him to do it. You have $1 million house sitting here doing absolutely nothing while my son is trying to build a legacy for his family. It is just a piece of paper, Nia. A good mother looks out for her son's business, and a good wife does whatever it takes to fund her husband's dreams. You should be apologizing to him for making him sneak around in the first place. If you were a generous woman, you would have offered the house to him months ago. I turned my head slowly to look at Marcus. Did you really forge my name because your mother told you to? Marcus looked annoyed, picking up his wineglass and taking a large gulp. My mom is right, Nia. We were on a tight deadline with the underwriters. I traced your signature from a voided check. It was a business decision. Now that you signed the official waivers tonight, the forged application is legally binding anyway. It does not matter who held the pen. The debt is shared, so drop it and let us eat in peace. I looked across the table at Chloe. She was quietly eating her pasta, staring at her plate, but a tiny, satisfied smile played on her lips. She was enjoying watching me get verbally dismantled in my own home. I looked back down at my lap. The Apple Watch secured tightly against my wrist under the soft cashmere sweater was silently absorbing every single word. I had Marcus explicitly admitting to tracing my signature to secure a federal loan. I had Brenda explicitly admitting to orchestrating the fraud and instructing her son to commit the crime. It was a flawless, undeniable, crystal-clear confession of a multi-million-dollar federal conspiracy captured in high-definition audio. I picked up my fork and took a bite of my dinner. You are right, I said softly, looking around the table at the three people who were actively trying to destroy my life. It really is just paper. Everything is going to work out exactly the way it is supposed to. The dinner plates were cleared, the wine glasses were empty, and the heavy atmosphere of the dining room had settled into a sickeningly domestic calm. Marcus and his mother were laughing at some joke on the television in the living room, completely relaxed, now that they believed I was legally trapped by my forged signatures. Chloe was curled up on my custom sofa, mindlessly scrolling through her phone, acting like she did not have a care in the world. I stood by the kitchen sink, washing the last of the imported ceramic dishes. I dried my hands on a linen towel and walked into the living room, projecting the exhausted, defeated aura they fully expected to see from a broken woman. I told Marcus I had a terrible headache and was going to take a hot shower to unwind. He barely looked away from the television screen, simply waving a dismissive hand and telling me to get some rest. I turned and walked up the staircase. As soon as I was out of their direct line of sight, the submissive facade dropped entirely. My heartbeat accelerated, thumping against my ribs like a war drum. I moved quickly and silently down the long hallway, slipping into the master bathroom and quietly sliding the heavy brass deadbolt into place. I reached into the massive glass shower enclosure and turned the water temperature all the way to the highest setting. The heavy rush of the water hitting the ceramic tiles created the perfect white noise barrier, drowning out any sound that might leak through the solid wood door. Steam immediately began to billow out, fogging up the large vanity mirrors and turning the room into a humid enclosed bunker. I sat down on the edge of the large marble bathtub, pulled my phone from my pocket, and dialed a number I knew by heart. In the corporate banking world, professional networks are absolutely everything. But for a Black woman navigating the high-stakes corporate ladder in Atlanta, your sorority sisters are your absolute lifeline. I called Tara. We had crossed the burning sands together a decade ago during our undergraduate years, and she was now a senior director at the State Public Records Office. If a legal document, a court filing, or a financial footprint existed anywhere in the state of Georgia, Tara had the executive security clearance to find it. The phone rang twice before she answered. Nia Tara said, her voice crisp and professional even at 8 o'clock at night. I thought you were practically off the grid this week getting ready for the wedding. Do not tell me you need another background check on a sketchy floral vendor. I need something much bigger than a florist. Tara, I said, keeping my voice low, practically pressing the phone against my mouth so the sound would not carry over the running water. I need you to pull a complete deep dive financial and legal history on two people. Right now. It is an absolute emergency and I cannot explain the details yet. Tara's tone shifted instantly. The playful banter vanished entirely, replaced by the sharp, protective focus of a sister who knew I never panicked without a legitimate reason. Give me the names, she said. I heard the rapid, rhythmic clicking of a high-end mechanical keyboard in the background as she woke up her dual monitors. I gave her the full legal names and birth dates of Marcus's brother Jamal and his wife Chloe. What exactly am I looking for here? Nia Tara asked, her voice locked into her professional investigative mode. I am staring at a massive state database. Give me a specific thread to pull so I can filter the search parameters. Look for absolutely everything, I instructed, my eyes darting toward the locked bathroom door. I need to know where Jamal actually is, because he is supposedly on a long business trip. But his wife just moved into my house with 4 massive suitcases and practically no explanation. I need their current residential addresses. I need you to check the civil court dockets for any recent filings. Check the county property records. I need to know why a woman who claims her husband is simply out of town packed up her entire life and moved into my guest room under the direct protection of my fiancé. The shower continued to run, the scalding water making the air thick and heavy in my lungs. I wiped a circle of condensation off the mirror and stared at my own reflection. My eyes looked tired, but the fire burning behind them was absolute and unforgiving. I listened to the steady, rhythmic clicking of Tara's keyboard over the speaker. The silence stretched for what felt like an absolute eternity. In the risk management profession, the waiting is always the hardest part. It is the agonizing gap between suspecting a catastrophic failure and seeing the raw data that confirms your absolute worst fears. My mind raced through a dozen different scenarios, each one darker than the last. I knew the fertility clinic invoice was real. I knew the forged loan was real. But the psychological manipulation required to pull this off meant there was a foundational lie holding the entire operation together. Chloe's presence in my house was not just about free rent. It was about proximity to Marcus. Okay, Tara finally murmured, her voice tight and analytical. I am inside the county property and tenancy records. Jamal and Chloe do not own a home. They have been renting a 2-bedroom apartment in Midtown for the last 3 years. But wait, this is highly irregular. The lease was terminated abruptly 2 weeks ago. The landlord filed an eviction notice for non-payment of rent, but the filing was withdrawn just 3 days later. It looks like the past due balance was suddenly paid off in full by an external third party. Marcus, I whispered, pressing my fingertips against my forehead. Marcus paid off their eviction debt to keep them quiet and clear their names from the public registry. Let me run a cross-check on the payment routing numbers. Tara said, the keyboard clicking furiously once again. While that is processing in the background, let me pull up the civil court dockets for Fulton County. You wanted to know if there were any recent legal filings attached to either of their names. The water from the shower was creating a dense, suffocating fog. My chest felt incredibly tight, the adrenaline pumping through my veins, making my hands shake slightly. I gripped the phone tighter, staring at the locked bathroom door, waiting for the final piece of the puzzle to fall into place. The typing suddenly stopped. The mechanical clicks vanished. The silence on the other end of the line was absolute, heavy, and terrifying. Nia Tara said. For the first time since I had known her, her voice actually trembled. It was not the voice of a professional data analyst. It was the voice of a friend who had just uncovered something devastating. Are you sitting down right now? I am sitting, I replied. my voice dropping to a harsh whisper. What did you find? Tara? Tell me exactly what you are looking at on your screen. I am looking at a finalized divorce decree from Fulton County Superior Court. Tara said, her voice dropping to a harsh, disbelieving whisper. Jamal and Chloe are not married, Nia. They have not been married for a very long time. They filed for divorce 14 months ago, and the judge signed the final dissolution of marriage exactly 8 months ago. The sound of the scalding water hitting the shower tiles faded into a dull, distant roar. I stared blindly at the foggy glass door of the shower enclosure. My brain struggled to process the sheer magnitude of the lie. That is impossible, I whispered, gripping the edge of the marble vanity. She is living in my guest room right now. Marcus told me Jamal is just away on a long business trip. He told me Jamal is infertile and that is why he was paying for her medical treatments. Tara let out a sharp, angry breath. Jamal is not infertile, Nia. I am reading the court documents right now. The grounds for the divorce were not irreconcilable differences. Jamal filed an at-fault divorce citing adultery. Chloe was having a long-term documented affair, and the correspondent listed in the initial filing, the man she was sleeping with, is Marcus. My eyes snapped from the foggy bathroom tiles down to the glowing screen of my phone. The air in my lungs turned to solid ice. A profound, blinding rage ignited in my chest, burning away every ounce of confusion and leaving only terrifying clarity. 8 months ago. That was exactly when Marcus started acting distant. That was when he started taking sudden weekend business trips to network with new clients. That was when he started complaining about cash flow issues at his sports agency, claiming the market was tight. He was not networking. He was managing the fallout of his affair with his brother's wife. The baby, I said, my voice sounding completely hollow in the humid room. The baby she is carrying. It is his, Tara confirmed grimly. It has to be. If the divorce was finalized 8 months ago and she is currently pregnant, the timeline aligns perfectly with their affair. The fertility clinic invoice you found makes perfect sense now. Chloe wanted to secure her meal ticket and Marcus funded it. He is not the noble sperm donor helping his tragic brother. He is the father. The entire twisted, sickening conspiracy laid itself out before me like a solved puzzle. Every single interaction I had endured over the last 48 hours was part of a meticulously orchestrated play. Brenda sitting at my dining room table just an hour ago demanding that I make my home softer and more inviting for a pregnant woman. Brenda looking at Chloe with that approving, supportive smile. Brenda scolding me for not being submissive enough to my hard-working fiancé. Brenda knew. The entire family knew. They had all conspired to move Marcus's pregnant mistress directly into my house. They wanted me to unknowingly play the accommodating host to the woman who was carrying my fiancé's illegitimate child. They needed me to stay in the dark just long enough to sign those federal loan documents. They were using my $1.5 million townhouse, my flawless credit score, and my executive salary to bankroll the new life Marcus and Chloe were building together. They looked at me, a highly educated, successful black woman, and decided I was nothing more than a disposable ATM to fund their toxic dysfunction. I am calling the police right now, Tara said, her keyboard clattering furiously as she closed out the court tabs. I am sending a squad car to your house, Nia. I have the county sheriff on speed dial. We are getting those parasites out of your home tonight. No, I commanded, my voice slicing through the steam like a razor blade. Do not call the police, Tara. What are you talking about? Tara demanded, her protective instincts flaring. They are committing massive fraud right under your nose. If you call the police tonight, it becomes a messy domestic dispute. I explained, my risk management training completely overriding my emotional devastation. The police will show up. Marcus will act like the calm, rational man. He will hire a defense attorney tomorrow morning. He will claim the forged signature was just a misunderstanding between an engaged couple. he will tie my property up in civil litigation for years, and he will walk away with a slap on the wrist. I do not just want him removed from my house. I want him utterly destroyed. I want him federally indicted. I want his mother publicly humiliated. I want Chloe to realize she attached herself to a sinking ship. I stood up from the edge of the bathtub. The trembling in my hands had completely stopped. "What do you need me to do?" Tara asked, matching my cold, professional tone. "Compile every single document you just pulled," I instructed. "The final divorce decree, the eviction notices, the names of the presiding judges. Everything. I need certified digital copies sent to my secure corporate email address by 7 o'clock tomorrow morning. I am going into the bank, and I am handing this entire portfolio over to the Federal Fraud Department." "Consider it done," Tara said. "Watch your back tonight, Naya. You are sleeping in a house full of desperate people." "I will be fine," I replied. "They think I am a broken, submissive woman who just surrendered her entire financial future to them. Let them sleep well tonight. It will be the last peaceful night they ever have." I ended the call and set the phone on the counter. I reached over and turned off the shower. The sudden silence in the bathroom was deafening. I looked at myself in the mirror. The steam was slowly clearing, revealing my reflection. I wiped a streak of moisture off the glass, staring directly into my own eyes. I had spent my entire adult life building an impenetrable fortress of success, and these people thought they could simply break in and steal the keys. They had drastically miscalculated the risk of their investment. I unlocked the heavy brass deadbolt and pulled the bathroom door open. The cool air of the hallway hit my skin. I walked calmly back down the corridor toward the master bedroom, my face an unreadable mask. The game was no longer about saving my wedding or confronting a cheating partner. It was about executing a flawless, undeniable financial and legal trap, and I was going to make sure the jaws of that trap snapped shut with the entire world watching. The next morning, the sharp, rhythmic click of my stilettos echoed against the imported marble floors of the bank's corporate lobby. I swiped my executive badge at the security turnstiles and stepped onto the private elevator that serviced the highest floors of the building. The doors slid shut, sealing me inside a quiet, mahogany-paneled box. I took a deep breath, letting the crisp, air-conditioned atmosphere fill my lungs. I was no longer the barefoot, oversized sweater-wearing woman playing the role of a submissive victim in my own dining room. I was wearing a tailored navy blue Tom Ford power suit. My hair was pulled back into a flawless, severe bun, and my posture was absolutely rigid. I was the director of risk management, and I had just stepped onto my battlefield. When I reached my corner office, my assistant had already placed my usual black coffee on my glass desk. I locked my office door, drew the automated privacy blinds, and booted up my secure workstation. Exactly as promised, a highly encrypted email from Tara was sitting at the top of my inbox. I downloaded the attached zip file and opened it across my dual monitors. The digital paperwork was flawlessly compiled. Tara had pulled the official judge-signed divorce decree between Jamal and Chloe. She had pulled the dismissed eviction notices for their Midtown apartment, complete with the payment routing numbers that traced directly back to a shell corporate account managed by Marcus. I took my phone out of my purse and transferred the high-resolution photos of the $65,000 fertility clinic invoice and the forged $2.5 million Small Business Administration loan application onto my desktop. Finally, I extracted the audio file from my Apple Watch. I spent the next hour meticulously organizing the data into a comprehensive, undeniable digital dossier. In my profession, you do not simply throw accusations at a wall and hope something sticks. You build a watertight chronological narrative of financial ruin that no defense attorney can possibly dismantle. I was treating my own catastrophic betrayal exactly like a corporate audit. At 9:30, I picked up my desk phone and dialed the internal extension for David, the senior vice president of the bank's anti-money laundering and fraud division. David and I had worked together for years. He was a ruthless, seasoned investigator who had put dozens of corrupt executives behind bars. I asked him to meet me in secure conference room B, and I told him to bring Special Agent Hayes, the FBI financial crimes liaison, who maintained a permanent office on our floor to monitor federal banking regulations. When I walked into the soundproof glass-walled conference room, David and Agent Hayes were already sitting at the long mahogany table. They looked relaxed, expecting a routine briefing on a corporate client or a suspicious offshore wire transfer. I set my encrypted tablet on the table, connected it to the massive digital display screen on the wall, and took my seat at the head of the table. "Gentlemen," I said, keeping my voice entirely devoid of emotion, "I am officially initiating a Protocol 1 fraud investigation. I am reporting a coordinated multi-million-dollar conspiracy to commit federal wire fraud, identity theft, and bank fraud." David sat up straight, his relaxed demeanor vanishing instantly. Agent Hayes pulled out his legal pad and clicked his pen. "Who is the target?" David asked. "Which corporate account are we freezing?" I tapped the screen of my tablet. The forged SBA loan application appeared on the massive display, highlighting the $2.5 million request. "The target is Marcus, the owner of Apex Sports Management," I replied. "He is also my fiancé." Both men stared at me in stunned silence. Before they could ask any questions, I began presenting the evidence with the cold surgical precision of a prosecutor. I walked them through the timeline. I showed them the forged signature on the primary collateral documents. I displayed the fertility clinic invoices to establish motive, proving he was secretly funding a child with his former sister-in-law while bleeding his own agency dry. I showed them the divorce decree to prove the entire family structure was a fabricated lie designed to manipulate me into compliance. Then I played the audio recording from the previous night's dinner. The room fell dead silent as Brenda's arrogant, booming voice echoed through the high-end conference room speakers, explicitly admitting that she had instructed Marcus to forge my name to secure the federal loan. Marcus's own voice followed, confirming that he had traced my signature from a voided check to bypass the underwriting deadline. When the recording ended, Agent Hayes slowly set his pen down on the table. He looked at the screen, then looked back at me, a profound look of professional respect crossing his face. "They actually admitted to federal forgery on tape," Agent Hayes said, almost in disbelief. "They handed you a signed confession wrapped in a bow. Nia, this is a slam-dunk federal indictment. With the amount exceeding $1 million, he is looking at a mandatory minimum of 10 years in federal prison. We can have a tactical unit at your house in an hour to arrest him." "No," I said sharply. "If you arrest him today, his high-profile athlete clients will quietly distance themselves. He will hire a brilliant defense team, and his mother will spend the next year hiding his assets. I do not just want him to go to prison. I want his public reputation completely eradicated. I want his agency destroyed. I want maximum visibility." I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the mahogany table. "The wedding is this Saturday. It is a massive, highly publicized event. Every single one of his top-tier clients will be sitting in the front row alongside our corporate board members and the local media. I want the arrest executed there, at the altar." David let out a low whistle, leaning back in his leather executive chair. "You want to execute a federal raid at your own luxury wedding? I want to make an example out of a man who thought a black woman's hard-earned wealth was his personal playground," I corrected him. "But I need your help to keep him on the hook until Saturday. Marcus submitted the secondary guarantor waivers this morning. He thinks the funds are going to be released by Friday. If the money does not hit his account, he will panic and try to flee." Agent Hayes nodded slowly, tapping his chin as he processed the strategy. "We can manipulate the banking system on our end. We will flag the SBA loan application under a silent administrative review. It is a standard compliance code. To Marcus, it will look like a routine bureaucratic delay, a simple banking glitch that requires a few extra days to clear. His accounts will be temporarily frozen to prevent him from moving any existing capital, but it will not trigger a criminal alert on his end. He will think he is just dealing with annoying red tape." Perfect, I said. Freeze his business accounts. Freeze his personal credit lines. Cut off his access to capital immediately. I want him to feel the walls closing in, but I want him to believe I can fix it for him after we say our vows. I spent the next 2 hours filling out the official federal affidavits, signing my actual name in bold, unmistakable blue ink. I formally declared the signatures on the loan documents as fraudulent. I officially authorized the bank to cooperate fully with the FBI's criminal investigation. Every single document I signed wove another layer of an inescapable legal net around Marcus, Chloe, and Brenda. When I finally walked out of the conference room, my chest felt incredibly light. The federal machine was officially moving. I had successfully transformed my personal heartbreak into a weapon of mass financial destruction. The trap was set, the bait was placed, and the authorities were in position. Now all I had to do was go back out into the world and play a game of psychological cat and mouse with a man who was rapidly running out of borrowed time and stolen money. By Thursday evening, the psychological warfare shifted from the quiet confines of my dining room to the chaotic, pulsating heart of downtown Atlanta. It was the night of my bachelorette party. Under normal circumstances, this would have been a curated, elegant evening with my closest sorority sisters and corporate mentors. But to maintain the absolute illusion of compliance, I had allowed Marcus to heavily influence the guest list. That meant the VIP section of the exclusive nightclub was currently swarming with Chloe and her personal entourage of entitled superficial friends. I sat on the edge of a curved white leather sofa. The club was a sensory overload of flashing neon lights, heavy bass that vibrated through the floorboards, and the thick scent of expensive perfume and alcohol. I wore a sleek, understated black designer dress, sipping a glass of sparkling water. I was an island of absolute stillness, in a sea of frantic energy. A few feet away from me, in the dead center of the VIP section, Chloe was holding court. She was wearing a tight sequined dress that highlighted her small baby bump, but she was behaving as if she were single and completely unburdened. She had been recklessly downing flutes of premium champagne for the last 2 hours, completely indifferent to the child she was carrying. Her blatant disregard for the pregnancy was just another glaring data point in her profile of total moral bankruptcy. Her friends were a tight-knit circle of white women who looked at me with thinly veiled disdain. They did not congratulate me on my upcoming wedding. They did not ask about my career or how Marcus and I met. Instead, they treated me like the hired help who had simply provided the venue for their personal party. They screamed over the loud music, ordering round after round of bottle service, pointing at the most expensive liquors on the menu, and letting the waitresses bring out the sparklers. I watched Chloe lean heavily against the glass table, her cheeks flushed with alcohol. She was sloppy, loud, and entirely drunk on the false power Marcus had given her. When people are intoxicated, their filters dissolve, and their true arrogance bleeds out into the open. I simply sat back, crossed my legs, and waited for her to start talking. It did not take long. The DJ transitioned to a slightly slower track, causing a brief dip in the crushing volume of the club. Chloe leaned into the center of her group, her voice carrying sharply over the music. She did not even bother to lower her volume or check if I was listening. She wanted me to hear her. She wanted to establish dominance in front of her audience. "You guys do not understand how exhausting it is living in that massive house," Chloe complained loudly, gesturing vaguely in my direction with her half-empty champagne flute. "It is like living in a museum. Everything is so stiff and boring. Marcus hates it. He tells me all the time that he cannot stand how cold she is." One of her friends, a blonde woman in a red dress, let out a high-pitched laugh and glanced at me. "Then why is he marrying her, Chloe? Why does he not just leave and be with you full-time?" Chloe rolled her eyes, taking another large gulp of her drink. "Because she is a walking ATM, obviously. Do you know how much money a risk director makes? Marcus is a brilliant agent, but his business needs capital to grow. He told me he is only walking down that aisle on Saturday to secure the funding for our future. He says being with her feels like attending a corporate board meeting, but being with me feels like coming home. The group of women cooed in sympathetic agreement, casting pitying, mocking glances my way. He is practically putting everything in my name anyway. Chloe bragged, her speech beginning to slur slightly, as her arrogance completely overtook her common sense. The cars, the business, the house. She is just paying the bills while we build our actual family. She is so desperate to keep a man that she just signs whatever we put in front of her. It is actually kind of pathetic. I almost feel bad for her. I sat perfectly still on the white leather sofa. A weaker woman might have cried. A more impulsive woman might have lunged across the glass table and dragged Chloe out of the club by her sequined hair. But I felt absolutely nothing but a cold surgical satisfaction. Every single insult she threw at me, every humiliating brag she made to her friends, was built on a foundation of stolen money that was currently evaporating into thin air. She was standing on a trapdoor mocking the person holding the lever. It was a spectacular display of toxic delusion. The hours dragged on, and the table became a graveyard of empty crystal bottles. The waitresses in their black uniforms began clearing the glasses. The lead server, carrying a sleek black leather folio, approached our section. She bypassed Chloe and her friends and walked directly over to me. She opened the folio and presented the itemized receipt. The total was exactly $5,200. Before I could even reach into my designer purse, Chloe suddenly pushed her way through her circle of friends. She stumbled slightly against the table but caught herself plastering a wildly triumphant smirk on her face. "Do not worry about it, Nia," Chloe announced, her voice booming over the music so everyone in the VIP section could hear her. "You have been looking so stressed out lately. You should just sit back and let a real man take care of the bill." She reached into her heavily beaded clutch and pulled out a heavy metallic card. She held it up high, letting the neon club lights catch the distinct matte finish of an exclusive black credit card. It was not her card, it was Marcus's card. The exact same card tied directly to the commercial accounts I had instructed Special Agent Hayes to freeze just 10 hours ago. "My man gave me this before I left the house tonight," Chloe bragged to her friends, waving the card like a royal scepter. "He told me to spoil my girls and not to worry about a single cent. He said he always takes care of the people who actually matter to him." She tossed the black card onto the leather folio with a loud metallic clatter. The server picked it up, nodded politely, and turned to walk toward the main bar terminals. Chloe turned back to me, crossing her arms over her chest. "See," she mocked, her blue eyes gleaming with drunken malice. "That is what a provider looks like. You might have the fancy job, Nia, but Marcus gives me the world without me even having to ask. You should take notes on how to properly inspire a man." I looked at the empty space where the server had just stood, and then I looked back at Chloe. The music continued to pound. The neon lights continued to flash. Her friends cheered, raising their empty glasses to toast her fabricated wealth. They were completely oblivious to the fact that the financial guillotine was currently falling. I uncrossed my legs, picked up my fresh glass of champagne from the table, and finally stood up. It was time to introduce Chloe to the real world. I moved around the heavy glass table with deliberate, unhurried grace. The heavy bass of the club music vibrated through the soles of my shoes, sending a rhythmic pulse up my legs. Chloe's friends noticed me approaching. The blonde woman in the red dress nudged Chloe, a mocking smile playing on her brightly painted lips. They were fully expecting me to throw a desperate, tearful tantrum. They wanted a show. They wanted the angry, unhinged black woman stereotype to validate their toxic narrative. Chloe turned toward me, her arms still crossed over her chest, her chin tilted upward in a posture of absolute unearned superiority. She thought she had won the ultimate prize. She thought the black metallic card currently sitting in the server's leather folio was her impenetrable shield against the real world. I stopped exactly 1 inch away from her. She opened her mouth, likely to deliver another drunken, patronizing insult for her audience, but the words never had the chance to leave her throat. Without changing my facial expression, without raising my heart rate a single beat, I extended my right arm directly over her head. I tilted my crystal flute. Time seemed to slow down to an absolute crawl. I watched the chilled golden liquid spill over the delicate rim of the glass. The champagne fell in a heavy, continuous stream, catching the flashing neon lights of the club as it dropped. It hit the exact center of her perfectly styled blonde hair. The liquid soaked instantly into her scalp, destroying her expensive blowout and plastering her curls flat against her face. The freezing alcohol cascaded down her forehead, running forcefully over her heavily applied makeup. It smeared her dark mascara into ugly, jagged lines across her cheeks and dripped rapidly onto her expensive sequined maternity dress, ruining the delicate fabric instantly. For 3 agonizing seconds, Chloe simply stood there, completely paralyzed by the sheer shock of the physical contact. The freezing temperature of the alcohol against her warm skin finally broke her drunken stupor. She let out a sharp, high-pitched shriek, throwing her hands up to protect her face. Her circle of toxic friends gasped in synchronized horror. They scrambled backward to avoid the splashing liquid, completely abandoning their queen the very second the situation became messy. I did not step back. I closed the remaining fraction of distance between us. I leaned my face in so close to hers that my lips were practically brushing her wet, champagne-soaked earlobe. The heavy, suffocating scent of her expensive floral perfume was now entirely masked by the sharp, acidic smell of cheap liquor. "Listen to me very carefully," I whispered. I kept my voice incredibly low and calm, ensuring that only she could hear the absolute venom in my words beneath the crushing volume of the club music. "That black credit card you just handed to the server with so much ridiculous pride, it does not work. I reported it stolen for suspected fraud early this morning. The bank completely locked the account. The federal authorities have frozen every single financial asset Marcus possesses. He cannot transfer money. He cannot withdraw cash. He cannot even buy a cup of coffee right now, let alone cover a $5,200 VIP bar tab." Chloe froze entirely. The drunken, arrogant haze in her blue eyes was instantly obliterated, replaced by a sharp, terrifying clarity. She turned her head slightly, trying to look at my face, but I kept my grip firm, resting my hand heavily on her shoulder to keep her trapped exactly where she was. "Do you understand what that means, Chloe?" I murmured gently, almost like I was comforting a frightened child. "It means you just racked up a massive bill under your own name at one of the most exclusive and ruthless clubs in Atlanta. And the man you think is your ultimate provider cannot save you. He is broke. He is drowning in federal investigations that he does not even know about yet. And you are standing here holding the bag for a party you cannot afford. I suggest you go into the kitchen and ask the manager how many dishes you need to wash to work off $5,000. Or better yet, ask your loyal friends to empty their designer purses for you." I pulled back slowly, releasing the pressure on her shoulder. I looked deeply into her face. The smug, entitled woman who had been bragging about stealing my life and my wealth just 2 minutes ago was entirely gone. In her place was a soaked, mascara-smeared, trembling mess. Her lower lip quivered violently. This time, the tears welling up in her eyes were not a manipulative weapon designed to elicit sympathy. They were born of absolute, genuine panic. Right on cue, the lead server returned to our VIP section. She was not alone. She was accompanied by a large, unsmiling security manager wearing a tailored black suit and a prominent earpiece. The server walked directly up to Chloe, holding the black leather folio open. The metallic card was sitting inside, accompanied by a long, red paper receipt that signaled a catastrophic failure. "Excuse me, ma'am," the server said. Her voice was completely devoid of the polite, fawning deference she had shown earlier when she thought she was serving a billionaire. "This card declined. Our merchant terminal flagged it with a severe code for suspected fraudulent activity. The issuing bank has instructed us to confiscate the physical card immediately. We need another form of payment for the $5,200 right now. If you cannot provide a valid payment method, my security manager will have to detain you and involve local law enforcement for theft of services." Chloe looked at the server, her mouth opening and closing in silent horror. She turned frantically to her group of friends, the champagne still dripping steadily from her chin and ruining the white leather sofa beneath her. "Guys," she stammered, her voice cracking with hysteria. "Can you guys please split this? I will pay you back tomorrow. I swear Marcus will wire you the money first thing in the morning. Please, I cannot be arrested. I am pregnant." The blonde woman in the red dress took another massive step back, violently shaking her head. "Are you crazy?" she snapped, holding her designer clutch tightly against her chest, as if Chloe might try to rip it from her hands. "I am not putting a $5,000 bar tab on my personal credit card. You ordered all those premium bottles, Chloe. You insisted on the sparklers. This is your problem, not ours." One by one, the women who had just been toasting to her fabricated wealth and laughing at my expense began looking away. They checked their phones, muttered weak excuses, and quietly edged their way out of the VIP section, melting into the crowded dance floor. Loyalty among parasites only lasts as long as the free drinks keep flowing. The moment the money stops, the illusion shatters. I set my empty crystal flute down on the glass table with a sharp, satisfying clink. I picked up my designer clutch and smoothed the front of my pristine black dress. Chloe looked at me, sheer terror radiating from her wide eyes. She reached out her wet hand, hovering in the air, as if she was actually going to beg the woman she had just spent 2 hours humiliating to save her from going to jail. "Have a wonderful night, Chloe," I said softly, flashing her a bright, flawless smile. "Make sure you get a receipt for those dishes." I turned my back on the VIP section and walked confidently toward the exit. I did not look over my shoulder when the large security guard firmly grasped Chloe by the arm. I did not stop walking when she started crying hysterically, screaming my name and begging the server to run the card just one more time. I simply stepped out of the heavy, suffocating atmosphere of the nightclub and out into the cool, refreshing night air of Atlanta. The first domino had officially fallen, and it was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. I drove home from the nightclub in absolute silence. The cool leather of my car seat grounded me, and the quiet hum of the engine provided the perfect soundtrack to my victory. When I stepped into my townhouse, it was empty and pristine. I carefully hung up my black designer dress, wiped off my makeup, and slipped into a pair of silk pajamas. I crawled into the center of the large master bed, turned on a dim reading light, and opened a book. But I was not actually reading. I was listening. I was waiting for the inevitable explosion. The trap I had set with the federal authorities was officially springing shut, and Marcus was currently caught right in the mechanical teeth. The digital clock beside me flipped to exactly midnight when the violent sound of the front door slamming open echoed up the staircase. Heavy, frantic footsteps pounded against the hardwood floors. Marcus did not just walk into the bedroom. He burst through the door like a man running from a burning building. His custom Italian suit jacket was crumpled in one hand. His expensive silk tie was ripped open at the collar, hanging loosely around his neck. Sweat beaded thickly across his forehead, and his chest heaved with shallow, panicked breaths. The sheer terror radiating from his body was palpable, and for a woman who had been betrayed so deeply, it was incredibly intoxicating to witness. "Naya," he gasped, dropping his jacket onto the floor and pacing frantically at the foot of the bed. "Something is wrong. Something is massively wrong with my accounts." I sat up slowly, putting a perfectly practiced expression of sleepy confusion on my face. "What are you talking about, Marcus?" I asked, making my voice sound groggy. "It is midnight. Where have you been?" He ran both hands over his head, his eyes wild and completely unfocused. "Everywhere. I have been everywhere trying to fix this. I tried to pay for a business dinner downtown and my corporate card declined. I thought it was just a terminal error, but then I tried to pull cash from an ATM and it said my account was locked. Then Chloe called me crying hysterically from the club. She said the black card was confiscated for suspected fraud and security nearly arrested her." He stopped pacing and stared at me, his voice pitching higher with genuine desperation. "I cannot access a single cent, Nia. My business accounts are entirely frozen. My personal checking is locked out. Even my emergency credit lines are throwing decline codes. The automated banking system will not even let me speak to a human representative. It just keeps giving me a severe compliance error code. Someone hacked me, or my agency is under some kind of targeted financial attack. If I cannot access my capital by tomorrow morning, my entire draft pick deal is going to collapse and I am ruined. I threw off the silk sheets and walked over to him. I placed my hands gently on his tense shoulders, forcing him to stop pacing. I looked deeply into his panicked eyes, projecting the ultimate aura of a supportive, highly knowledgeable banking executive. "Marcus, breathe," I said softly. "You are spiraling. Sit down for a second and let me think." I guided him to the edge of the mattress. He collapsed onto the bed, burying his face in his hands. I went to the master bathroom, poured him a glass of cold water, and brought it back. "Drink this," I commanded gently. He took the glass with trembling hands and took a large gulp, water spilling slightly onto his expensive shirt. "Now listen to me," I said, sitting beside him and rubbing his back in slow, soothing circles. "You are not being hacked. I see this exact scenario at the bank all the time. Think about your spending patterns over the last 48 hours. You just submitted a massive $2.5 million federal loan application. Right after that, Chloe tries to run a $5,000 VIP bar tab at a nightclub on a card registered in your name, to an automated banking algorithm that looks exactly like a stolen identity spree. The system simply triggered a massive fraud protection protocol." Marcus looked up at me. His eyes were wide, desperately wanting to believe the logical lifeline I was throwing him. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice shaking. "Because the code said it was a severe compliance hold." "Yes," I lied smoothly, keeping my heartbeat perfectly steady. "It is a standard pre-wedding banking glitch. The federal underwriters are simply doing a silent administrative review on the collateral. When they lock a commercial loan for review, they automatically freeze the attached liquid accounts to ensure the asset baseline does not change. It is just bureaucratic red tape." "But my draft picks," Marcus pleaded, grabbing my hand. "I need that money tomorrow." I leaned in and kissed his sweaty temple. "You are not getting that money tomorrow, Marcus. These federal reviews take at least 3 business days to clear. But you do not need to panic. The wedding is on Saturday. Once we are legally married, our financial profiles will fully merge. I can call the underwriters on Monday morning as your wife and the primary guarantor on the property. I will personally authorize the release of the funds and clear the red tape for you from the inside." The transformation in his body was immediate and absolute. The rigid, terrified tension completely melted out of his muscles. He let out a massive, shuddering breath of profound relief. He leaned forward and wrapped his arms tightly around my waist, burying his face against my stomach. "Thank God," he whispered fiercely. "Thank God I am marrying a woman who understands this financial world. I thought I was going to lose everything tonight. I thought my entire life was over." I stood there in the quiet bedroom, stroking his hair with the gentle, rhythmic motion of a loving partner. He was thanking the very woman who had personally orchestrated his absolute destruction. He was dropping his guard, completely trusting me to save him from a trap I had built with my own 2 hands. He believed that the finish line was just 3 days away, utterly blind to the fact that his finish line was a brick wall. "You are never going to lose everything, Marcus," I said softly to the dark room, a cold smile touching my lips. "Just focus on the wedding. I promise you by Saturday afternoon, all of your financial problems will be permanently resolved." The private dining room at the Capitol Grill in downtown Atlanta was bathed in warm amber light. A heavy crystal chandelier hung above the long mahogany table, casting a soft, expensive glow over the imported linens, the polished silver cutlery, and the massive floral centerpieces I had personally selected. To the waiters and the other patrons looking through the frosted glass doors, we looked like the absolute pinnacle of success. A wealthy, beautiful family gathered on the eve of a spectacular luxury wedding. But as the camera of reality moved closer to the table, the suffocating tension in the air became entirely undeniable. It was Friday night, the rehearsal dinner. Marcus sat beside me at the head of the table wearing a custom velvet dinner jacket that probably cost more than his car lease. He was smiling at his groomsmen, laughing loudly at the right moments, and playing the role of the confident, powerful sports agent to absolute perfection. But I was sitting close enough to see the cracks in his armor. I could see the subtle, uncontrollable tremor in his hands every time he picked up his crystal water glass. I could see a heavy layer of nervous sweat forming at his hairline. His commercial accounts were still completely frozen by the federal authorities. He was bleeding out, financially panicking behind his million-dollar smile, and he truly believed I was his only remaining lifeline. Directly across the table sat Chloe. She was a mere shadow of the arrogant, loud woman she had been 24 hours ago at the nightclub. She wore a high-necked, conservative maternity dress that looked incredibly cheap compared to the luxurious surroundings. She had barely touched her expensive filet mignon. Every single time our eyes met across the table, she quickly looked down at her lap, her face pale and drawn. The lingering terror of her declined black card, the public humiliation, and her near arrest had completely broken her spirit. She was beginning to realize that the wealthy fantasy she had built with Marcus was rapidly turning into a nightmare. Brenda, however, was in rare form. Marcus's mother was drinking expensive Cabernet, wearing a hideous sequined gown that caught too much light and aggressively dominating the conversation. She was treating the restaurant staff terribly, barking orders at the waiters and complaining about the temperature of the soup. She was projecting extreme confidence because she believed the trap was already set and I was safely secured inside it. As the waiters cleared the dessert plates and began pouring the final round of espresso, the meaningless chatter around the table naturally began to die down. The atmosphere shifted. Marcus adjusted his silk tie and cleared his throat. He looked across the mahogany table at his mother. Brenda stopped swirling her wine and gave him a singular sharp nod. It was a silent, chilling signal. It was the look of two predators deciding it was time to finally kill the prey. Marcus reached down into his leather briefcase resting by his chair. He pulled out a thick cream-colored legal folder and placed it gently on the table between us. He reached out and took my hand. His palm was clammy and ice-cold. Nia, baby Marcus started, his voice smooth and dripping with that practiced salesman sincerity. Before we head into tomorrow and say our vows before God, there is one last piece of business we need to handle. We are both highly successful people. We are building a massive empire together. But I know how incredibly hard you have worked for your career at the bank, and I know how much your house means to you. Brenda leaned forward, resting her heavy elbows on the table and putting on a sickeningly sweet smile that did not reach her eyes. Marcus came to me yesterday, Nia. He told me he wanted to make sure you felt absolutely secure entering this marriage. In today's world, a smart corporate woman like you needs ironclad protection. We want to do this right. We want to protect your assets. Marcus opened the cream-colored folder, revealing a thick stack of legal documents. It is a prenuptial agreement, he said softly, looking deeply into my eyes. I had my lawyers drafted up this afternoon. It explicitly states that your Buckhead townhouse remains entirely your separate property in the event of a divorce. It fully protects your executive savings and your retirement accounts. I am putting it all in writing, Nia. I want you to know that I am marrying you for your heart, not your portfolio. I looked down at the crisp legal document resting on the table. It was a beautiful, masterful performance. If I had been a naive woman blinded by love or a desperate bride terrified of losing her handsome groom, I would have seen this as the ultimate romantic gesture. A proud black man putting his ego aside to legally protect his wealthy wife. I would have signed it immediately through tears of gratitude. But I was not a naive woman. I was a director of risk management. I spent my entire professional life hunting financial predators. I knew that when a drowning man hands you a life jacket, it is almost always tied to an incredibly heavy anchor. This is very thoughtful, Marcus, I said, keeping my voice perfectly neutral and soft. I gently pulled my hand out of his grip and picked up the document. I began to slowly turn the pages. I completely bypassed the flashy bolded sections at the front that highlighted my house and my bank accounts. That was just the bait. I went straight to the dense single-spaced paragraphs buried deep in the back of the contract under the miscellaneous liability and indemnification clauses. That is exactly where corporate criminals always bury the bodies. It took my trained eyes exactly 45 seconds to find the trap. Section 8, Paragraph C. The language was incredibly dense, wrapped in complicated corporate legal jargon designed to confuse a layman. But the core translation was painfully simple and absolutely devastating. By signing this document to allegedly protect my physical property, I was simultaneously agreeing to assume joint and several liability for any commercial debt lines of credit or federal loans incurred by Apex Sports Management prior to the date of the marriage. The sheer audacity of the document made my blood run cold. They were not trying to protect my house. They were trying to legally bind me to the $2.5 million Small Business Administration loan. Marcus knew his federal application was currently frozen in a severe compliance review. He knew the forged signature on the collateral form was a massive radioactive vulnerability. He was terrified the authorities were closing in on him. If he could trick me into signing this prenuptial agreement tonight, he could present it to the federal underwriters and the FBI tomorrow morning as proof that I was a willing, legally bound participant in his corporate debt. He was trying to legally chain me to his sinking ship so I would go down with him and take the financial impact. I slowly looked up from the document. Marcus was staring at me, his eyes wide and hungry, completely desperate for me to pick up the expensive pen resting beside the folder. Brenda was holding her breath, her fake, supportive smile frozen on her face like a plastic mask. Chloe was watching me from across the table with a mixture of deep jealousy and nervous anticipation. They were all holding their collective breath, waiting for the stupid, blindly loyal woman to sign away her total financial freedom just to save their toxic family. They thought I was an easy mark. They thought I was trapped by the pressure of the rehearsal dinner and the watchful eyes of our guests. They had absolutely no idea that I had brought my own weapons to the table. I did not close the cream-colored folder. I kept my eyes locked on the dense paragraph at the bottom of page 12. The absolute silence in the private dining room stretched tight heavy with the unspoken desperation of the three people sitting around me. Marcus shifted his weight, his velvet dinner jacket rustling against the mahogany chair. Before Marcus could formulate a lie to push me into signing, a man sitting at the far end of the table cleared his throat. It was Donovan, the aggressive, highly paid corporate attorney Marcus kept on retainer for his sports agency. Donovan stood up and smoothed his expensive silk tie. He walked over and stood right behind Marcus, placing a heavy, reassuring hand on his client's shoulder. "It is merely standard boilerplate language," Nia Donovan said, his voice slick and coated in false professionalism. "I drafted that clause myself. It is a reciprocal indemnification provision. It simply means that since Marcus is waiving any future claim to your personal real estate, you are mutually agreeing not to interfere with the corporate liability structure of his agency. It is a completely standard protection for high net worth entrepreneurs. You have absolutely nothing to worry about." I looked up from the document, shifting my gaze directly into Donovan's eyes. "I am a director of risk management, Donovan. I read risk assessment contracts for breakfast. Section 8, paragraph C, does not say I agree to not interfere. It explicitly states I assume joint and several liability for all commercial debts incurred prior to the marriage. That is not boilerplate. That is a financial death sentence for the guarantor." Donovan offered a patronizing, tight-lipped smile. He looked at me the way shady lawyers always look at women they assume they can intimidate with legal jargon. "You are misinterpreting the corporate veil doctrine, Nia. But we are on a very tight timeline tonight. The rehearsal is tomorrow. We need this executed immediately to file it with the county clerk before the weekend." I leaned back in my chair and folded my hands neatly on my lap. "I am sure we do," I replied calmly. "But I have a strict personal policy. I never sign binding legal contracts without my own counsel reviewing them first." Brenda slammed her wineglass down on the table. "For heaven's sake, Nia. It is Friday night. Where are you going to find a lawyer at 8 o'clock in the evening to read a piece of paper that my son is generously giving you to protect your own house? Stop stalling and sign it. I smiled warmly at Brenda. I do not need to find one. I brought him with me. I raised my right hand and gave a subtle two-finger wave toward the frosted glass doors of the private dining room. The heavy doors immediately swung open. A tall, impeccably dressed man holding a slim leather briefcase stepped into the room. He wore a charcoal gray suit that radiated authority and carried himself with the absolute precision of a seasoned predator. His name was Harrison. I had introduced him to the hostess earlier as my family attorney. In reality, he was the lead undercover financial investigator for the bank's fraud division directly assigned to my case by Special Agent Hayes. Marcus visibly flinched. Donovan narrowed his eyes, his posture instantly becoming rigid. Chloe, who had been quietly shrinking into her chair, suddenly sat up straight. She looked at Harrison, then looked at me, a smug, highly irritated grin spreading across her face. She rolled her eyes and crossed her arms over her cheap maternity dress, clearly thinking I was just being a difficult, paranoid woman trying to ruin a nice family dinner. Everyone, I said smoothly, gesturing to the man now standing beside my chair. Please meet Harrison. He has handled my personal estate and private financial matters for years. Harrison, this is Marcus, his mother Brenda, and his legal counsel Donovan. Harrison offered a brief, perfectly polite nod. Good evening. Naya informed me that a prenuptial agreement was being presented tonight. As her fiduciary representative, I am here to review the terms. Donovan stepped forward, puffing his chest out to establish dominance. With all due respect, Counselor, this is a highly private family dinner. The document is incredibly straightforward. There is no need for opposing counsel to turn a wedding rehearsal into a hostile negotiation. Harrison did not even blink. He reached down, picked up the cream-colored folder from the table, and pulled a silver pen from his jacket pocket. A competent attorney never fears a secondary review, Donovan. Unless, of course, the document contains material non-disclosures. The rapid, silent exchange of power in the room was spectacular. The camera of my attention shifted rapidly between them. I watched Donovan's jaw clench. I watched Marcus swallow hard, a fresh bead of sweat rolling down his temple. I watched Chloe smirk, completely oblivious to the legal execution taking place right in front of her. Harrison flipped directly to page 12. He read the clause in silence for exactly 10 seconds. When he looked back up, his eyes were devoid of any warmth. This clause binds my client to Apex Sports Management's existing commercial debt. Harrison stated, his voice cutting through the room like a scalpel. Joint and several liability. If I allow her to sign this, she is financially responsible for every single loan your client currently holds. Donovan stepped closer, dropping his friendly facade entirely. His voice lowered into a threatening, passive-aggressive register. My client is a highly successful sports agent. Apex Sports Management operates on standard cash flow. There are no massive debts. It is a formality to satisfy future corporate investors. If she loves him, she signs the paper. Harrison smiled. It was a terrifying smile. Excellent. If there are no massive debts, then you will have absolutely no problem attaching a sworn schedule of assets and liabilities to the back of this agreement. Marcus let out a sharp, involuntary gasp. Harrison turned his sharp gaze directly onto Marcus. A schedule of assets and liabilities is a legally binding affidavit. You must list every single line of credit, every corporate loan, and every federal application currently pending under your name. If you sign it and you omit a debt, say a multi-million-dollar federal loan pending with the Small Business Administration, you commit perjury. So Mr. Donovan produced the schedule. My client will sign your indemnification clause the very second your client signs a sworn statement that his company is debt-free. The trap was utterly flawless. Harrison was using complex legal doublespeak to force Marcus into a corner with no exits. If Marcus refused to produce the schedule, I would legally refuse to sign the prenuptial agreement. Without my signature on the liability waiver, his federal loan application would be rejected on Monday morning, his fraud would be exposed, and he would lose everything. But if Marcus produced a fake schedule tonight explicitly claiming he had no federal loans and signed it in front of a licensed attorney, he was actively committing documented federal perjury to secure a fraudulent contract. He would be handing the FBI the final undeniable piece of evidence they needed to lock him in a federal penitentiary for a decade. Chloe leaned across the table, her smug grin firmly in place. Just print the paper, Marcus. Show her lawyer you do not owe anyone anything. She is just being dramatic. Let her sign the contract so we can finally eat dessert. Marcus stared at Chloe with a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. He was drowning in a raging ocean, and his pregnant mistress was happily handing him an anvil. He looked at Donovan. Donovan gave him a slow, grim nod. The shady lawyer knew they had no choice. They needed my signature to unfreeze their accounts tomorrow. They had to take the risk. Donovan reached into his own briefcase and pulled out a blank schedule of assets and liabilities form. He placed it on the mahogany table. Marcus picked up a pen with a violently shaking hand. He checked the box indicating his business was entirely free of commercial debt. He signed his name at the bottom. Harrison smoothly pulled the paper across the table, inspecting the perjured signature. He looked at me and gave a microscopic, nearly invisible nod. The investigator had his proof. The federal crime was now complete and legally notarized. Everything appears to be in order, Nia Harrison said, sliding the prenuptial agreement back in front of me. You may proceed. Harrison's silver pen felt heavy and cold in my hand. I looked across the table at Marcus. The severe, panicked sweat that had been dripping from his forehead just moments ago was beginning to dry. He was looking at the cream-colored folder with a hungry, desperate anticipation. I gave him a warm, reassuring smile. It was the smile of a completely devoted, entirely manageable future wife who had just accepted her place in his shadow. I lowered the tip of the fountain pen to the thick, textured paper. The memory of that exact second plays in my mind like a slow-motion film. The extreme close-up of the silver nib pressing firmly into the designated signature line. The crisp, sharp scratching sound of the dark ink flowing onto the page echoed loudly in the quiet dining room. I did not use a phantom signature this time. I used my absolute legally binding, flawless corporate signature. I wanted this specific document sealed, certified, and permanently indestructible. I signed my name, dated it precisely, and pushed the heavy folder back across the mahogany table. The collective sigh of relief from the other side of the table was so massive it practically shifted the air in the room. Marcus closed his eyes and let out a long, shuddering breath. He slumped back into his velvet dining chair, the rigid terror finally leaving his broad shoulders. Brenda clapped her hands together, a sharp, piercing sound of absolute victory. She picked up her wine glass and held it high in the air, her face flushed with triumph. To family, Brenda announced, her loud voice booming through the elegant private dining room, and to a woman who finally learned how to support her man properly. I knew you had it in you, Nia. You made the right choice tonight for everyone. Donovan, the shady corporate lawyer, let out a smug chuckle. He reached over, closed the folder with a definitive snap, and slid it directly into his luxury leather briefcase. A wise decision, Nia, he said smoothly, locking the brass clasps on his bag. It is always better to keep things simple and cooperative. I will have this filed with the county clerk first thing Monday morning to ensure the corporate liability structures are fully realized. Chloe leaned back in her chair, her pale face finally regaining some color. She picked up her gold-trimmed dessert menu, completely ignoring the massive legal bullet that had just grazed the room. Thank goodness that is over, Chloe complained with a dramatic sigh. Can we finally order the chocolate lava cake now? I am eating for two, and the baby is absolutely starving. Marcus reached across the table and grabbed my hand, squeezing my fingers so tightly it almost hurt. Thank you, baby, he whispered, his eyes shining with profound relief and fabricated love. You just saved our future. You have no idea how much this means to me. I smiled back at him, letting my eyes soften into a look of complete adoration. I know exactly what it means, Marcus. What Marcus, Brenda, Chloe, and even the arrogant lawyer Donovan did not know was that they had just blindly walked into the most lethal financial trap of their entire lives. When Harrison picked up the cream-colored folder to inspect the indemnification clause earlier, he did not just read page 12. Harrison is a master federal investigator who has spent 20 years dismantling high-level corporate syndicates. With a flawless, imperceptible sleight of hand executed right under Donovan's arrogant nose, Harrison had slipped a single highly customized page into the back of the contract stack. When Marcus grabbed his own pen in a blind panic to sign the perjured schedule of assets and liabilities, Donovan had instructed him to initial the bottom of the adjoining pages to officially certify the addendum. Marcus was so terrified of losing my signature and so desperate to secure the deal that he quickly initialed every single page Harrison pointed to without reading a single word of the fine print. The page Harrison inserted was not standard boilerplate language. It was an embedded acknowledgement of bank fraud clause. Disguised under standard corporate indemnification formatting and heavy legal jargon, the clause explicitly stated that Marcus was the sole architect of the $2.5 million Small Business Administration loan. It legally declared that any secondary signatures attached to that specific federal commercial loan were obtained without the primary guarantor's physical presence or informed consent. By signing his name and initialing that specific page right next to his perjured schedule, Marcus had unknowingly executed a sworn legally binding confession. He had officially admitted on paper to being the sole mastermind of a federal financial crime. Donovan, the man paid to protect him, was going to walk into the county courthouse on Monday morning and file a notarized federal confession into the public record, completely destroying his own client. Harrison clicked his silver pen shut and slipped it back into his tailored charcoal jacket pocket. "My work here is concluded," Harrison said, his voice entirely devoid of emotion. He gave me a brief professional nod, completely breaking his undercover character for just a fraction of a second to convey absolute operational success. "Have a wonderful wedding weekend, everyone." Harrison turned and walked out of the private dining room, the heavy frosted glass doors closing quietly behind him. The atmosphere at the table instantly transformed into a lively, celebratory party. The suffocating tension was completely gone. Marcus flagged down a waiter and recklessly ordered 2 bottles of the most expensive vintage champagne on the menu. He completely forgot that his accounts were currently frozen by a severe compliance hold because he truly believed my signature on the prenuptial agreement would magically unlock his capital the second the banks opened on Monday. The waiters brought out decadent chocolate cakes, fresh berries, and tall crystal flutes. Brenda laughed loudly, telling embarrassing childhood stories about Marcus while aggressively dominating the conversation. Chloe ate her dessert with a sickeningly smug expression on her face, rubbing her pregnant belly and acting like the undisputed queen of the castle. They toasted to the lavish wedding. They toasted to the limitless future of Apex Sports Management. They toasted to the baby growing in Chloe's stomach. I sat quietly in my chair, sipping my sparkling water, surrounded by people who were actively celebrating their own impending incarceration. I watched Marcus drink his champagne in large, greedy gulps, his handsome face glowing with arrogance and absolute relief. I watched Brenda gloat about her superior family values and traditional wisdom. I watched Chloe play the role of the innocent, fragile mother to be who had finally secured her wealthy lifestyle. Let them enjoy the warm chocolate cake. Let them drink the expensive vintage champagne. Let them sleep peacefully tonight in their luxurious hotel suites, dreaming of the millions of dollars they thought they had successfully stolen from me. Tomorrow was Saturday, the wedding day. The day I would stand at the altar in front of 300 guests, the national sports media and the federal authorities, and burn their entire world to the ground. Marcus raised his glass to me one final time before the dinner concluded, the golden bubbles catching the chandelier light. "To the most beautiful, supportive bride in the world," he declared proudly. I raised my water glass and gently clinked it against his crystal flute. "To getting exactly what we deserve," I replied. The camera glides high above the historic Biltmore ballrooms in the heart of Midtown Atlanta. It sweeps down from the vaulted hand-painted ceilings, capturing the sheer breathtaking scale of a $150,000 wedding. Hundreds of pristine white orchids cascade from massive crystal chandeliers suspended in the air like floating clouds. The grand center aisle is completely carpeted in a thick, flawless layer of white rose petals. Tall, glowing pillar candles line the walkway, casting a warm, flickering golden light over the polished marble floors. Every single detail in the massive room screams wealth, power, and absolute perfection. It is a visual masterpiece of luxury event planning funded entirely by my executive salary, and it serves as the ultimate inescapable public arena for the destruction I am about to unleash. The camera pans slowly across the divided guest list, highlighting the stark, fascinating contrast between the two sides of the room. On the groom's side sits the flashy, high-stakes world of professional sports. Dozens of Marcus's top-tier athlete clients fill the front rows. There are starting point guards, defensive linemen, and rising track stars wearing brightly colored custom suits, laughing loudly and checking their diamond-encrusted watches. They are the vital capital Marcus desperately needs to keep his sports agency afloat, the very people he has lied to and manipulated to project an image of extreme success. Sitting right in the center of the front row, basking in the glow of the chandeliers, is Brenda. She is wearing an extravagant gold fascinator that rudely blocks the view of the people behind her. She sits like a triumphant queen mother, her chest puffed out, radiating the smug, toxic satisfaction of a woman who believes she has successfully conquered my bank accounts and secured her son's fraudulent empire. On the bride's side sits the quiet, ruthless power of the corporate financial sector. My managing directors, senior vice presidents, and corporate mentors sit in perfectly tailored, understated charcoal and navy suits. They are not checking their watches. They are not taking selfies. They are sitting perfectly still, their eyes sharp and analytical. Scattered strategically among them, completely unidentifiable to the athletes across the aisle, are a dozen undercover federal agents and compliance officers. They are wearing sharp suits blending in perfectly, with the bankers their earpieces hidden beneath their collars. They are simply waiting for my signal. At the end of the long petal-strewn aisle stands a massive towering floral archway. Underneath it stands Marcus. He looks exactly like a man who believes he has just successfully conquered the world. He is wearing a custom black velvet tuxedo that fits his broad shoulders flawlessly. His hands are clasped confidently in front of him, and he is flashing that million-dollar camera-ready smile to his high-profile clients in the audience. The severe panicked sweat from the night before is completely gone. He believes the prenuptial agreement he signed last night magically erased his massive federal liabilities. He believes my signature is currently working its way through the banking system, unlocking his frozen corporate accounts. He is standing at the altar of his own massive ego, entirely oblivious to the fact that he is actually standing directly on a federal trapdoor that I am about to pull open. Just a few feet away from him, positioned exactly where she demanded to be, stands Chloe. She is dressed in a pale blush bridesmaid gown that she specifically altered to cling tightly to her small but distinct baby bump. The terrified, sobbing, champagne-soaked girl from the VIP nightclub section is completely gone, replaced once again by the highly entitled woman who thinks she has won the ultimate prize. She gives Marcus a subtle secret smile across the altar, gently rubbing her stomach with one hand. She thinks this massive, expensive wedding is just a temporary, necessary theatrical performance. She truly believes that tomorrow morning they are going to take my money, clear their debts, and start their new life together. The low, excited murmur of the 300 guests instantly goes completely quiet as the heavy, dramatic chords of the pipe organ fill the massive ballroom. The enormous mahogany double doors at the back of the venue swing open simultaneously. The guests stand up in unison, turning their heads toward the entrance. I step into the grand doorway. My wedding gown is a custom silk masterpiece, featuring a corset bodice and a long, dramatic train that sweeps heavily across the polished floor. A sheer cathedral-length veil covers my face, completely masking my expression from the crowd. I do not have a father to walk me down the aisle, which is perfectly fitting because I am the only person who built my incredible life and I am the only person who will defend it. I take my first step onto the white rose petals. The music swells glorious and triumphant, echoing off the high stone walls and vibrating through the floorboards. Every single eye in the massive room is locked directly on me. I look through the delicate sheer fabric of my veil straight down the long aisle. I lock eyes with Marcus. His bright smile widens into an expression of profound, arrogant victory. He mouths the words, "You look beautiful." He thinks he is looking at his submissive, wealthy savior walking toward him to hand over her entire life's work. He thinks he finally broke my spirit. But as I move slowly and deliberately down the aisle, my posture is completely rigid. My hands gripping a tightly bound bouquet of white roses are not shaking with bridal nerves. They are completely steady, anchored by the absolute certainty of what I am about to do. Beneath the delicate lace and the imported silk, my heart beats with a slow, terrifying, measured rhythm. I am not a beautiful, blushing bride walking toward her happily ever after. I am the lead executioner walking to the chopping block. I pass my brilliant corporate executives. I pass the undercover federal agents who subtly shift their weight preparing to move. I pass the professional athletes who are about to watch their trusted agent be destroyed in real time. My eyes hidden behind the veil are entirely dead to the man standing at the altar. There is absolutely no warmth, no love, and no hesitation left in my soul for Marcus or his family. There is only a cold, calculating, absolute lethality. I have spent the last 7 days absorbing their lies, their emotional manipulation, and their blatant financial theft. I have played their twisted game perfectly. Now the music is reaching its crescendo, I am stepping up to the altar, and the bill is finally coming due. I reach the altar and handed my tightly bound bouquet of white roses to my maid of honor, a trusted colleague from the bank. I turn to face Marcus. The pastor, a highly respected figure in Atlanta's religious community, began the ceremony. He spoke beautifully about trust, commitment, and the sacred bond of marriage. Marcus nodded along his face, a perfect mask of pious devotion. He reached out and took both of my hands in his. His palms were warm and dry, entirely relaxed now that he believed his financial crimes were legally buried under the prenuptial agreement safely filed in Donovan's briefcase. I let him hold my hands. I listened to the pastor's words, letting the absolute hypocrisy of the moment settle over the room. The camera of my focus circled us slowly, capturing the perfect lighting, the stunning floral archway, and the sheer magnitude of the lie Marcus was trying to execute on national television. Nia, the pastor, said, his voice echoing clearly through the massive ballroom. "Do you take Marcus to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" The silence in the Biltmore ballrooms was absolute. 300 guests held their collective breath, waiting for the magical words that would bind two powerful people together. Marcus squeezed my hands, his smile radiant and expectant. I slowly pulled my hands out of his grip. I did not smile. I did not cry. I turned slightly and reached out smoothly, taking the wireless microphone directly from the pastor's hand. "I do not," I said. My voice was amplified, echoing sharply off the vaulted ceilings. It sliced through the romantic atmosphere like a guillotine blade. The collective gasp from the audience was instantaneous. Marcus's smile vanished completely. His handsome face dropped into an expression of profound, uncomprehending shock. He took a half step forward, reaching for my arm. "Nia, what are you doing?" he hissed under his breath, his eyes darting frantically toward the front row where his clients and his mother were sitting in stunned silence. I took a step back, keeping the microphone raised. "I am not marrying you, Marcus," I announced clearly, making sure every single person in the room heard me. "But I did not bring everyone here today for nothing. I do have a wedding gift for the groom's family." I raised my left hand and snapped my fingers once. It was the signal my audio-visual team had been waiting for all morning. The massive, incredibly expensive LED screens positioned behind the floral archway, which were supposed to display a romantic slideshow of our engagement photos, suddenly flickered. The soft ambient lighting in the ballroom instantly cut to black. The screens flared to life with blinding, undeniable clarity. The first image to flash across the massive displays was the official judge-signed divorce decree from Fulton County. The names Jamal and Chloe were highlighted in bright, aggressive yellow. The date of dissolution exactly 8 months ago was circled in bold red ink. A murmur of extreme confusion rippled through the audience. I watched Chloe standing just a few feet away drop her bridesmaid bouquet. The pale blush drained entirely from her face. Before anyone could fully process the first document, the screen shifted. The next image was a certified DNA paternity test, explicitly linking the child in Chloe's womb directly to Marcus. The word positive flashed across the screen in massive, unavoidable lettering. The murmur in the crowd instantly escalated into a roar of pure shock. The professional athletes in the front row began leaning forward, whispering frantically to each other, realizing their trusted agent had been caught in a massive scandal. But the final blow was auditory. The massive speakers surrounding the ballroom suddenly blasted the crystal-clear audio recording from the dinner table. Brenda's arrogant, domineering voice filled the room, explicitly admitting that she had instructed Marcus to forge my name to secure the federal loan. Marcus's own voice followed, confirming that he had traced my signature from a voided check to bypass the underwriting deadline. The Biltmore ballrooms erupted into absolute chaos. Guests were standing up, shouting and pulling out their phones to record the disaster unfolding at the altar. Marcus stood frozen, his eyes wide with sheer terror, staring at the massive screens, displaying the undeniable proof of his total destruction. The perspective narrows, acting like a frantic, unsteady lens zooming directly into Marcus's face. Heavy, thick beads of sweat slide rapidly down his temples, soaking into the stiff white collar of his custom velvet tuxedo. His chest heaves in jagged, terrified gasps. He waves his hands desperately toward the front row, where his high-profile athlete clients are already standing up in disgust. "It is fake," Marcus shouts, his voice cracking loudly over the microphone I am still holding. "It is manipulated audio. She is trying to ruin my agency because I made her sign a prenuptial agreement last night. Please, you have to believe me," but no one is sitting back down. The athletes are already dialing their legal representatives. The audio was simply too crisp, and the certified documents displayed on the massive LED screens are undeniably authentic. Suddenly, a guttural, furious scream rips through the chaotic noise of the ballroom. Brenda leaps from her front row seat. Her ridiculous gold fascinator falls to the marble floor and is instantly trampled as she lunges directly at me. Her hands are curled into vicious claws, her face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. "You deceitful witch!" she shrieks, spitting the words with venom. She does not make it within 10 feet of the altar. Two massive, broad-shouldered private security guards, whom I had explicitly briefed and positioned for this exact moment, step seamlessly into her path. They intercept her mid-lunge, grabbing her arms and physically lifting her off the floor. Brenda thrashes wildly, kicking her expensive heels and screaming obscenities, completely shattering her carefully crafted illusion of high society elegance. Marcus turns back to me, dropping his arrogant facade entirely. He falls to his knees, right on the edge of the rose-petal-covered steps. "Nia, please!" He begs, tears streaming down his sweating face. "We can fix this. Just turn the screens off. I will do whatever you want." Before I can even process his pathetic plea, the heavy mahogany double doors at the back of the Biltmore ballrooms burst open with a deafening, violent crash. The entire room goes dead silent. A tactical team of FBI agents, flanked by plainclothes detectives from the Financial Crimes Unit, marches purposefully down the grand center aisle. They step right over the scattered white rose petals, the bright flash of their gold badges catching the light of the crystal chandeliers overhead. I look down at the man kneeling in front of me. My voice is steady, amplified, and entirely devoid of mercy. "I did not just cancel a wedding today, Marcus," I state clearly. The man walking toward you is Special Agent Hayes. He is here to execute an arrest warrant for federal forgery, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit bank fraud. The prenuptial agreement you signed last night contained an embedded legally binding confession to the $2.5 million fraudulent commercial loan. Marcus lets out a suffocated, high-pitched gasp, clutching his chest as if he has been physically shot. Under federal and Georgia state law, I continue the words striking him like physical blows, a documented wire fraud conspiracy exceeding $1 million carries a mandatory minimum sentence of 10 years in a federal penitentiary. You are not going on a honeymoon to the Maldives, Marcus. You are going to a federal cell. Special Agent Hayes did not waste a single second. He stepped past the massive floral arrangements, grabbed Marcus by the collar of his custom velvet tuxedo, and hauled him roughly to his feet. The sharp metallic click of steel handcuffs snapping around Marcus's wrists echoed loudly through the microphone still resting in my hand. Hayes began reading him his Miranda rights, the dull bureaucratic language of the law completely overriding the romantic ambiance of the ballroom. Marcus did not fight back. His legs completely gave out. He hung in the grip of the federal agents, a broken, humiliated man sobbing uncontrollably in front of everyone he had ever tried to impress. To his right, Chloe finally comprehended the absolute reality of her situation. The wealthy provider she had stolen was going to federal prison. Her meal ticket was entirely gone. She was legally divorced, completely broke, and facing a $5,000 nightclub debt she could not possibly pay. She collapsed onto the white rose petals, ruining her blush bridesmaid dress, sobbing hysterically and clutching her stomach. But no one rushed to comfort her. Brenda, desperate to regain control of the narrative, suddenly shrieked and grabbed her chest. She threw herself onto the marble floor, thrashing wildly and screaming that she was having a massive heart attack. But the venue's standby paramedics simply walked over, checked her strong racing pulse, and instructed the security guards to escort her out of the building for trespassing. Her final pathetic theatrical performance was completely ignored by the authorities. I looked at the front row. Every single professional athlete Marcus had recruited to build his fake empire was already on their cell phone. They were loudly instructing their lawyers and public relations managers to sever all ties with Apex Sports Management immediately. His business evaporated into thin air before he was even marched out the front doors of the venue. The camera of my life slowly began to pull back, keeping me perfectly centered in the frame as the absolute chaos continued to unfold around me. I reached up and carefully pulled the diamond pins from my hair. I let the heavy cathedral-length veil slip off my shoulders and fall to the floor, leaving it behind in the dirt and the crushed rose petals. I turned my back on the altar and began walking down the long, beautiful aisle. A catering waiter was standing frozen near the exit, holding a silver tray of vintage champagne. I smoothly picked up a crystal flute without breaking my stride. I stopped at the grand mahogany doors and turned around to face the stunned, silent crowd of corporate executives and remaining guests. The lobster buffet has been paid for in full and is currently open in the reception hall, I announced, clearly raising my glass in a final toast. Please enjoy the food. I turned and walked out of the Biltmore ballrooms and into the warm Atlanta evening. A sleek chauffeured black town car was waiting for me at the curb, its engine purring quietly. The driver opened the door. I slid into the luxurious leather back seat, took a sip of my champagne, and told him to drive me directly to the international terminal. I had a first-class ticket to the Amalfi Coast, and I was going to enjoy every single second of my luxury honeymoon entirely alone.